Welcome to the day one of the Allyship Journey. Our world is on fire. We see riots, polarization, fights with the police or the military. We can see an uproar of resistance from so many places, and we don't always understand why and what is our role in it. How can we have the proper conversation we need to have without offending anyone? How can we truly respect all the people in our organizations? How can we make a concrete change? Well, in order to change a system, we first need to understand it, not only the symptoms, but also the root causes. Because the personal is political. Anything happening in our lives is also a reflect of the system we live in. And I do believe that in order to improve a situation, we first have to name what is not working. Today, we live in a social system which is called patriarchy. Patriarchy, or rule of the father, is a system where men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. We live in an economic system which is capitalism, based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. Capitalism is based on private property rights, profit, and competition. The first thing we need to understand is that these systems are pretty recent. Capitalism is about 500 years old and accelerated with the Industrial Revolution. And patriarchy is about 5,000 to 6,000 years old. Before that, people were living in tribes, collecting fruits, killing wild animals to survive. Contrary to a common idea, prehistoric times were not patriarchal per se. Men would go hunting and women would collect food and take care of babies. But this separation of tasks did not mean that they had different values or that one was more powerful than the other. This is what has been introduced by patriarchy and later capitalism, a ranking of people according to their economical value. Patriarchy appeared progressively for different reasons. First, men realized their role in human conception. They understood the link between sex and birth 9 months later. Then, in the book The Creation of Patriarchy, Gerda Lerner explains how agriculture, domesticating animals, sedentarism led to the emergence of private property, tools and cattle owned by men. As productivity increased with the use of animal power and the introduction of bronze tools, economic surplus also increased. So it became possible to accumulate wealth instead of having to consume everything produced. It was now of the utmost importance to control the sexual life of women, to be sure your son was actually yours, and thus protect your inheritance. From there originated the importance of female virginity before marriage and faithfulness during. The marriage contracts became economical contracts, a way to gain land and more property. And slavery became a way to own people to make even more profit. During the antiquity, the works of Aristotle already portrayed women as morally, intellectually, and physically inferior to men. So women as the property of men, claimed that women's role in society was to reproduce and to serve men in the household, and so male domination of women as natural and virtuous. Already 300 years before Christ, the Greek society was functioning according to a hierarchy called human chain of being, with God on top of man, women, people of color, children, animals, nature. So deeply embedded in our psyche, it's this vertical hierarchy among beings. Progressively, we evolved from an economy of subsistence, an economy of allowing us to produce and consume the goods we needed, to an economy of property and accumulation. We produced more and more technical tools. And this happened mostly at the cost of others, expropriating farmers from their lands to build vast properties, invading other territories to ensure that we own more natural resources, enslave more people to gain free workers, produce more than we can consume in order to accumulate more wealth and capital. The system needed more and more compliant producers willing to work to create wealth for someone else, while receiving only a small proportion for themselves in the form of wages. And we started using not only other human beings, but also the nature as an infinite resource that solely belonged to us. In her book, Caliban and the Witch, the Italian feminist Silvia Federici considers the killing of the witches as foundational of a capitalist system that domesticates women, imposing on them the reproduction of the workforce as forced labor without any remuneration. Europeans then invaded the American continent, killing 75 million people, about 95% of the local population. Since there were no more people to actually cultivate the land, free labor was imported from the African continent, allowing Europe to accumulate even more wealth. The scientific revolution is also seen by many ecofeminists as heralding the era in which women, as well as nature, came to be dominated, controlled, and exploited. All natural wisdom known by indigenous people or rural women was destroyed and taken back by white male doctors or scientists. All these past events led to the current system, mostly vertical, hierarchical, a pyramid, where a few hold the power over a vast majority of others. It is the domination system Ryan Eisler describes in her book, The Chalice and the Blade. It is characterized by authoritarian and inequitable social and economic structure, high degrees of abuse and violence, subordination of women and femininity to man and masculinity, beliefs and stories that justify and idealize domination and violence. The whole challenge of diversity and inclusion is to make it more horizontal and collaborative. Imagine the challenge. It will not happen in one day. It requires a complete shift of mindset. And it is especially hard because the system is invisible, like the Matrix. The UK activist Carolina Criado Perez says, "Patriarchy is invisible. You're living in it every day, but you don't see it." So now we know in which system we live in. What is systemic oppression? Systemic oppression refers to the mistreatment of people within a specific group, supported and enforced by the society and its institutions. Systemic oppression exists at different levels which interconnect. At interpersonal level, this refers to prejudices and discriminatory behaviors where one group makes assumptions about the abilities and motives and intents of other groups based on their origin. You assume that overweight people are lazy, that rural people are uneducated, that students of color are not college material. Your assumptions might influence your grades if you're a teacher, your promotion process in your organizations, and so on. At internalized level, members of stigmatized groups who are bombarded with negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth may internalize those negative messages. It holds people back from achieving their fullest potential. It is the imposter syndrome, thinking that you're never good enough. At institutional level, institutional discrimination occurs when organizations, businesses, or institutions like schools or police departments discriminate, either deliberately or indirectly, against certain groups of people to limit their rights. This type of discrimination reflects the cultural assumptions of the dominant group. For example, a discipline policy that correlates to a disproportionate number of African American boys being sent out of class. Finally, at structural level, this refers to the accumulation over centuries of the effects of a discriminating society. Think again about the creation of the white middle class and what it means today to have been left out of that process of wealth creation, home ownership, college education, etc. During this whole process, we have unconsciously integrated many unspoken hierarchies. White superior to people of color, men superior to women, adults superior to children, human beings superior to nature, heterosexual superior to gay or trans people, able-bodied superior to any less able-bodied, slim superior to fat, more educated superior to less educated, urban superior to rural, extroverts superior to introverts, mentally healthy superior to mentally ill, Catholics superior to Islam and others, individual superior to collective. The competitive nature of the system and the constant need to grow and expand often has led to military conflict and war as capitalist interests compete for control of markets, trade routes, and natural resources, both inside and outside their national borders. This is called imperialism, extending a country's power and influence through colonization, use of military force, or other means. As a conclusion, without rigorous examination, behavior is reproductive. By default, current practices, cultural norms, and institutional arrangements foster and maintain inequitable outcomes. To undo systemic oppression, we must forge multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual alliances and create democratic processes that give voice to new organizing systems for humanity. For the duration of this allyship journey, I engage you to take a notebook or a journal where you can start to write down your key learnings. After each video, I will ask you a few questions to reflect upon during the coming days. For this first video, I would like you to write down your reactions. Did you feel triggered by what I explained? What were the thoughts and emotions you had? Time for thought. Have a great rest of the day.